Susan, I wondered about using the 30 years on the data instead of using the period of record. Not that that's going to create any more water, but would using period of record in the forecasting help or hinder any in terms of what you do, or does it make any difference?
Yep. Thanks for that question. Most federal agencies use the same period of record, so we would have to deviate from that in order to use that. But I don't think it would be helpful. I think that moving to the new 30-year period has tightened things up as far as uncertainty that I see in the forecast now, because we are getting rid of those wet 80s years. We don't really need, well, I suppose we always need to plan for a wet year, but those are not coming as often as the dry years are. So moving to the 91 to 2020 statistics has enabled our forecasts to be a little more in line with the trends that we've seen recently. And if you use the full period of record, you're going to be getting, you know, pre-climate change sets of years that definitely could exist in the historical period of record, but maybe don't always. The other issue is that not all projects have data going back that far. So you're going to be looking at different projects and different rivers and forecasts that are using different periods of record, and that can be not the best either.
I was wondering if Navajo Lake's having the same problems as McPhee is as far as the O&M being built proportional to the use of the water, and are they also needing to look further for funding for their O&M than the farmers?
Not as of yet. Navajo does have, the facilities are not exposing as quickly as they are at Navajo. And part of that is just the way that Navajo is designed, is, you know, where the intakes are for the diversions that are being used. So it hasn't become an issue yet, but I'm sure that is something that our O&M group plans for.
I was really appreciative, Ben, of you talking about the amount of water change that would need to happen from a dry piece of land versus that has a little bit of water that would take to replenish that. I'm an archaeologist in the region, and I see that Canaan of the Ancients has been completely cut off from its water source with McPhee. And one of the things that I'm curious about future adaptation for management is by reestablishing some downstream components of health of ecosystem by allowing for natural water systems going back to regions that had and still have people utilizing the landscape.
Yeah, what would you like me to talk about with that? That sounds like a very complete statement.
I guess I'm curious more. That would be maybe a question for Ken at McPhee. But I'm just curious if any understanding of how further projections than the historic projections we're talking about and asking about, looking at how that can help potentially manage how we utilize resources like our water to reestablish things that the farmers themselves currently are using from looking at maybe more longer projections of use.
Well, you started off with canyons of the ancients. That's on the dry side. So it's not heavily impacted by McPhee. Now, the lower Dolores is and San Miguel focus on the confluence. And the biggest impact there is the lack of spring runoff. It's been dry for 100 years in the summertime. I don't know. That'll be part of the conversation when I look to more localized work. We'll continue to work with our partners that include CPW. We've got a monitoring and recommendation team, the BLM, Forest Service. I mean, we'll be looking at downstream issues as well as our traditional uses, since they are a big part of the project. But I wouldn't project where it goes because I'm not sure about any of that right now, but the conversations will start.
We had one question here too. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
There you go. Ben, I have a question for you. First, I wanted to say, first, I really admire all you're doing with your ranch. And I'm so impressed. I know, I don't know, but imagine how hard that can be. But I'm curious about this. Do you think any of the processes, techniques that you're using are transferable or more. Let me break it into two parts. It seems like you're doing what you need to do, which is you're not going to have water, so you got to cut back on your herd. But it seems like if everybody in the area was doing that, then it would be difficult because everybody's got their herd for sale or whatever. So is that something that can be followed more generally in the ranching community? And if are there, let me ask it this way: are there tools that could be adopted in terms of water rights administration that would be helpful towards that? So, for more ability to switch your water use from one use to another in a bad year, for example. Are there things that you can think of that would be helpful in your sort of streamlining your business?
Yeah, so I think the concepts we use are translatable across the entire ranching community, but everyone's situation is really different. Like we don't have grazing permits on our ranch, so that changes our dynamic quite a bit. I think that's a bigger business question, but I think in general the concepts do apply. As far as water administration management, the ability to move water to different uses, I feel we've thought about this a lot, and with a perennial crop like pasture, I feel like the idea of fallowing land isn't always as successful. But yeah, you'll need more water next year, or potentially lose a perennial crop, which is a huge expense to replace. Being able to perhaps shift location or time of use might be beneficial, but that gets complicated.
One more question?
We have one here unless the moderator wants to. Okay.
My question has to do with forest fire. We have seen in the state the last 2 years the biggest forest fires in Colorado history. Fortunately, they were not in our watersheds here. They were further, north of I-70, as I call it, the state of north of I-70. But when you think about planning, whether it's, for municipal water supply, for water storage, for what would happen to McPhee if there was a 100,000-acre fire above it, how do you incorporate that possibility that we hope we will see, but we could, into your planning efforts and projections as far as timing of runoff, water quality for municipalities? I just think of all the things that we'd have to deal with if that came here. So that's kind of a big, complicated question. Maybe starting with Susan and whoever else wants to talk about that.
Yeah, and thanks for that question. Our Technical Service Center does do a lot of research into forest fire impacts on sediment inflows, timing, and rates. Ultimately, it's another factor that gets built into the concept that we are going to be experiencing earlier runoff. And if there's a forest fire above one of the reservoirs, you're going to have much earlier runoff. The water quality impacts, I think, are less understood right now, but they are being studied. I don't think that we have a good plan right now of incorporating the impacts of wildfires, partially because they are completely unpredictable as far as location goes. I guess they're not totally unpredictable. A forest science person might argue me with that, and that they would be right. But we don't have enough information to even really know how to use that information yet.
I would add, it goes to the fact that we didn't plan these projects with that kind of thinking in mind. Having said that, it's been pointed out in a day-to-day operational sense. We have farmers that started making decisions in March and will continue for the next month. And so we have the short-term focus in the day-to-day activities. What kind of water supply do they need to plan around? And that's getting really tough. Now, having said that, the fact that the movie this morning showed significant parts of the Forest Service collaboratives we have shows that this area has been looking for the forest resiliency and other needs that they are looking for since Missionary Ridge. And so we're very lucky that we have these groups, because the Forest Service obviously plays a big impact into that. But we're well ahead of other parts of the state with all these collaboratives from Wolf Creek pretty much all the way down through McPhee. Some of the other folks in this room could talk about how many years it takes to get the boots on the ground, as it were. Well, we're well ahead on those. So we're making those long-term plans, but we're just a partner in that, not, you know, a partial leader, but there's so much more than just Water Conservancy can do on those watershed issues. But we help get the ball rolling, and now those collaboratives are doing great. Then longer term, I think we're going to have to bring some of these larger studies down to a localized level. Scenarios planning's great for the long-term horizon, but are we planning for 5 years, 10, 20, 30? And we've got people that are planning for the next 6 months. So it's a busy time. And we're starting to have these thoughts, but we need to focus them just like the collaboratives, get them set going in the right direction, and then it's going to take some time to get these studies, science, and everything localized.
Do we have time for one question from someone on Zoom?
Sure.
Quick.
Kate Castos asked, anyone on the panel, how well do you feel the 9 region municipalities are engaging in water sustainability? And if not, how better to get them on board? It's one thing for ranchers to do their part, but all players need to be in the game.
I know locally, our municipalities are looking at it hard and getting into the game, but just like us, they planned around this quote-unquote historical project. So I think they're doing well over on the west end, and we're going to be meeting with them next week and talking about that. Now, their needs are numerically tend to be smaller, but they do have their own unique reliability needs. So they're part of the conversation. It'll grow. And in some respects, just due to our area with the rural nature, ag and ecology seem to be the ones that are most visual, whether it's fallowed land or dry road.
Great, thanks. Susan, I want to let you know it's okay. We're all a bit derailed today being here in person, so thanks. Let's say thanks for the panel.